I believe her birth name was Margaret Ruth Hart. And her mother's name was Margaret Rose, so I think it was carrying through that lineage. And she was born, I believe, in 1911. But she was born in Tiffin, Ohio.
Grandfather had a business of his own, a grocery delivery business, and he and my grandmother moved there fairly early in their marriage. They had two children, my mom, who was the younger of the two, and her brother, Donald, who I think was 2 years older than she was.
My mom was quite a tomboy and was known actually as Johnny Ruth when she was growing up. And I remember her telling stories about that and how they had this big watering trough in the center of town. And she would get to take the horse that had been pulling the wagon down to this central watering trough. And it's a small enough town that she grew up in that everybody knew her as Johnny Ruth. And I later went back to college there and looked enough like her that people would stop me in the street and they'd say, Ruth? Wondering if I was she. Suddenly transported back in time. So she grew up and went to the public schools in Tiffin, Ohio, and went actually to college there. And that was at a time when not a lot of women were going to college. I think they were just starting to. And that's where she met my father. And she studied education and indeed spent her life teaching. She taught every grade except kindergarten, but she taught high school and then middle school or junior high and elementary school also. And she taught me when I was in third grade. My teacher went on maternity leave for the second half of third grade, and my mother became my teacher, which was interesting. And I'd always gotten A's in everything, and she gave me my first B. And so that was memorable to me, and it was in music. And we were learning that year to play those little black song flutes. And I remember playing My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, which was one of the harder songs in the book. And I thought I did a great job, and I couldn't believe my mother could give me a B, but she did. Anyway, obviously that stayed with me.
The big gift at Christmas, the big box under there that I looked at and said, oh, I can hardly wait to open it up. And I opened it up and I looked at it, and there were 12 books in there, and they were the 12 volumes of the encyclopedia. Oh, whoopee! Yay! Just what a kid wants, you know. But it turned out that was, that was a good thing in the end.
She was a very beloved teacher. And even after she had passed away, we still had students coming back, to see my father and myself when I was at the house, and to tell us how much of an influence she had on them and their lives. It's a good legacy.
Grandmother was Mennonite. She was very crafts oriented, wove rugs, painted pictures. She passed that on to my mom.
So with my mom, a lot of it was more of the craft sorts of things that children would do. And then in addition, she did her ceramics work.
The ceramics were a huge, huge part of her life, and she made things for various people. I think I included a plate there just to show that she did plates. And the jewelry, okay, back to the jewelry. That was an amazing thing. She used everyday objects to make her molds, to form the molds, and then she would pour the clay in and fire it and then glaze it. And she made many, many different things. And of course, my favorite are the yellow roses. And now you're asking about the embroidery work. Later, when the arthritis was bad and she was not able to do some of the other more intricate things. However, this was a little larger, so she was able to do that with the Asian lilies and the pussy willows that are favorites of mine. She created that, so those are very, very special things to me.
My mother unfortunately had very crippling arthritis, so that changed the arc of her life a lot. Many times when I was growing up, she would have long periods of not being able to teach and was, housebound. And we would move the bed into the living room. And, that's basically until she could somehow recover. But it was very joyful. My mom never let the levels of pain she was in really create problems for the rest of us. So I don't know whether it was so much of a, suck it up and endure it, or just a choice to really look at the bright side of life, which I think she did most of the time.
I mean, I think ultimately her demise was accelerated by an accident that she was in. She and Dad were riding with some friends, and they were driving on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and they were rear-ended by a truck. And it was after that injury it seemed to complicate and compromise her, or her arthritis, the rheumatoid nature, her immune system must have been compromised.
My mother and father and I were supposed to have gone to the Ceramic Society convention. So we were looking forward to that time together, and then my mother fell ill and was hospitalized, and my dad still had to go to the convention, the conference. And so I told him I would go home. Well, as I was leaving one night from the hospital, we went to adjust her in bed because she was not able to do that for herself any longer. And the nurses came in, and when they adjusted my mom, she made a sound, and I thought, this isn't right. And I started crying on my way out of the hospital because I just felt like something was really wrong. And I saw one of my favorite nurses that I'd met in that week, of intimacy when you're dealing with this. And she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, I think something's really happened to my mom." And she said, "Don't worry, go home. We'll take care of her." And then I got a call in the middle of the night that night and went back to the hospital. And we contacted my dad and had him fly home. And luckily he got to be home, and the whole family was there with her when she passed. But they just ended up taking her off life support. But she was able to comfort my dad, and even though she had intubated, I could see her telling him that she loved him. So as all things go, it was a good passing, but poignant and a loss, of course.
Ask those questions that you never ask when you're a kid. You don't necessarily ask, and you don't even need to know them till later on you're a parent. And even now, even later in life. I mean, it's too bad that you can't bring them back and just say, "Hey, I'd like to talk about this for a minute. What did you do, or what would you do?"
And so I think when your parent is not there with you, you think about it even more. Well, what would my mother have done? Because I had no idea what to do in most cases. And so I thought about those things that comforted me the most, and tried to do that with each of you. So whether that was rocking, in a rocking chair together, or reading, or singing silly songs, which I don't in particular remember doing with her, but I remember her singing, and I remember sitting with my head on her chest and hearing the sound of her voice, through her chest, which was a very comforting thing. And that was part of, I think, my rocking with you as children, so that some of that feeling would get imparted. Always convey love, and she was very egalitarian about everything. And so that is an important core value for me as well. And that feels like enough. That's about it, if you can, convey love and be present for people. Thanks, Mom. And I say it all the time. Nothing more than that.